What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, there are places on Earth where reality itself seems to bend, where people vanish without explanation, where shadows move on their own, and where the living are not always alone? The 5 locations you're about to hear are not movie sets or fictional nightmares. They are real places that exist right now, places where something deeply wrong continues to happen, and investigators, residents, and visitors are running out of explanations. Some of you will recognize these names. Some of you will wish you hadn't. So before we begin, I want you to think about the scariest moment of your life. Hold that feeling, because what you're about to hear might change how you see the world forever. This is Lunar Lore, and these are the 5 most haunted places on Earth. The first story takes us to the dense forests of Romania, to a village that time seems to have forgotten. Hoia Baciu Forest spans over 20,000 acres of thick woodland, and locals have a name for it that translates to something that will make your skin crawl. They call it the Forest of the Damned. In the 1960s, a biologist named Alexandru Sift decided to explore deeper into this forest than most people dare. He brought equipment, notebooks, and enough courage to ignore the warnings from local villagers who begged him to turn back. What Alexandru found in those woods would change his life forever, and what he documented would baffle researchers for decades. He discovered an area roughly 700 meters across where nothing grows. Not a single blade of grass, not one weed, nothing but bare earth and stones. The locals said this was the Devil's Garden, a place where something had scorched the land itself. But Alexandru pressed deeper into Hoia Baciu, and that's when things started to go wrong. Alexandru began to experience phenomena that had no logical explanation. He heard voices calling his name from deep within the forest. But when he turned to face them, there was only silence and the sound of wind through the branches. His instruments malfunctioned repeatedly. His compass spun wildly, unable to find north. His camera developed strange white mists on every photo he took, mists that seemed to move and shift like something alive. He documented feelings of being watched, of an overwhelming presence closing in from all directions, and most disturbing of all, he began to lose time. He would look at his watch and realize that hours had passed without his awareness, yet he could only account for minutes. One night, Alexandru made a final entry in his journal before leaving the forest forever. He wrote that he had seen something that night, something that moved between the trees on legs that bent the wrong way, something that looked at him with eyes that were not human. He never returned to Hoia Baciu. He spent the rest of his life refusing to discuss what he saw, and those who knew him said the forest had taken something from him that he never got back. But Alexandru was just one person. Hundreds of others have reported similar experiences in Hoia Baciu Forest. In 1968, a 5-year-old girl named Denisa wandered away from her family during a camping trip near the forest's edge. Search parties combed the area for 3 days and found nothing. On the 4th day, Denisa emerged from the woods completely alone. She was unharmed, but something was profoundly wrong. She had no memory of the 3 days she was missing. She couldn't remember where she had been or what she had done. When asked if anyone had helped her, she said something that still haunts those who knew her. She said that the forest had kept her, that the tall man with the wrong face had shown her things, and that when he finally let her go, she had been there for only minutes. Her family moved away from Romania within a month. Denisa refused to speak about her experience for the rest of her life, and on her deathbed, she finally told her daughter one thing. She said the forest was alive, and it was still hungry, Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Hoia Baciu became known to paranormal researchers around the world. People came from across Europe hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural, and many of them left changed. Some reported seeing humanoid figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Others documented strange sounds, metallic voices that seemed to speak in no known language, and overwhelming feelings of dread that came and went without warning. In 1993, a research team led by paranormal investigator Florence Mirandej spent an entire month in the forest. Their equipment recorded thousands of hours of audio and video. Most of it was useless, but certain sections made people question what was really happening in Hoia Baciu. On day 18 of their investigation, their cameras recorded what appeared to be a massive black shape moving through the forest at night, a shape that was far too large and far too coordinated to be any animal they could identify. It moved with purpose, and it seemed to be aware of the cameras recording it. What's most disturbing is what happened to the research team after they left. Florence Mirandej claimed that something had followed them out of the forest. He said that members of his team began experiencing strange phenomena wherever they went. One researcher named Christina reported that she could no longer see her reflection in mirrors. Another team member, Pavel, said that he could hear the forest at night, that he could hear those same voices calling to him, begging him to come back. Within 5 years, 3 members of the research team had died under mysterious circumstances. Florence Mirandej refused to discuss the details, and he destroyed most of the evidence from their investigation. Before his death in 2012, he gave one final interview to a documentary filmmaker. In that interview, he said something that remains one of the most chilling statements ever made about Hoia Baciu. He said that the forest is not a place, it's a thing. It's something that exists between moments, between the spaces where reality is thinnest, and that it feeds on human consciousness. He said that once you've been inside it, truly inside it, you can never fully leave. Today, Hoia Baciu Forest remains largely inaccessible to the general public. The Romanian government has restricted access to the deepest parts of the forest, claiming environmental protection measures. But locals know the truth. They know that people still disappear there. They know that hikers still go in and come out changed. And they know that the forest is still calling, still waiting, still hungry for those brave enough or foolish enough to answer. Some say that if you listen carefully near the forest's edge on certain nights, you can hear it. You can hear the voices of all the people who have gone missing there over the centuries, all of them still trapped between moments, still waiting in the darkness, still calling out to the living. Now we move from a forest that devours time itself to a place where the dead refuse to rest. We're going to Eastern Europe, to a small town in Poland that has become synonymous with one of the most documented cases of mass paranormal activity ever recorded. Pniewy, a town of fewer than 10,000 people, became the center of a phenomenon so disturbing that even skeptics who investigated it came away shaken. In 2009, strange occurrences began in an apartment building on Mikuica Street. It started small. Tenants reported hearing footsteps in the hallways at night when no one was walking. Doors would open and close on their own, but then it escalated. Objects began to move. Furniture would shift positions overnight. Pictures would fall from walls despite being securely hung. And most disturbing of all, people began to hear voices. A woman named Katarzyna lived on the 3rd floor of the building with her 2 children. She started a journal documenting everything that was happening. She wrote about the scratching sounds coming from inside the walls, sounds so persistent and loud that she could barely sleep. She wrote about her children waking up screaming about the dark figure that stood at the foot of their beds. She wrote about finding her daughter standing in the kitchen in the middle of the night, eyes wide open but completely asleep, with all the kitchen knives laid out on the table in front of her. Katarzyna tried to get help. She called the police, but they found nothing. She called a priest, but the priest refused to enter the building after the first night, claiming that something in the apartment had looked at him with ancient eyes and smiled. Desperate, Katarzyna called a local paranormal investigator named Jacek Piotrowski. Jacek was a skeptic. He had investigated hundreds of cases that turned out to be explainable by drafts, settling foundations, or human psychology. But when he arrived at the building on Mikuwica Street, he immediately felt that something was different. He set up equipment and began documenting what happened. Within hours, his cameras recorded something that he could not explain. In one of the empty apartments on the 4th floor, a door that had been locked suddenly opened on its own. Jacek climbed the stairs and entered the apartment. As he stood in the main room, every light bulb in the apartment exploded simultaneously, sending glass raining down on him. The temperature dropped to below freezing in seconds. And then Jacek heard it, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke in Polish, but the words were old, ancient Polish from centuries past. It said something that Jacek would later translate as, "I have been waiting in the walls. I have been waiting so long." Jacek ran from the building, but the phenomena continued to escalate. Within weeks, residents began reporting physical injuries. People would wake up with deep scratches across their bodies, scratches that formed patterns too precise to have been made by accident. One resident, a man named Piotr, woke up to find his entire body covered in thousands of tiny scratches, each one forming a symbol of some kind. He was rushed to the hospital, but the doctors had no explanation for how the scratches had formed. Some of them were too deep and too precise to have been made by fingernails. A few appeared to have been made by something with more than 5 points of contact. The building became a focal point for paranormal researchers from across Europe. They came with equipment, with priests, with exorcists, and with theories. But nothing worked. Every attempt to cleanse the building failed. Every ritual backfired, and every person who spent significant time in the building reported the same thing. The presence was getting stronger. In 2010, a team of investigators decided to conduct a 24-hour continuous recording in the most active apartment. They set up multiple cameras, audio recorders, and thermal imaging equipment. What they captured during those 24 hours became known as the Pniewy files, and it remains one of the most disturbing pieces of paranormal documentation ever recorded. At 11 minutes into the recording, a shadow appeared in the corner of one of the rooms. This shadow was not cast by anything visible. It existed independently, moving and shifting like something alive. As the hours passed, the shadow grew darker, more defined, and more solid. By hour 6, the shadow had taken on an almost humanoid shape. By hour 12, it was fully three-dimensional. At the 17-hour mark, the shadow moved toward the main camera, and the recording went to static. When the recording came back online 7 minutes later, the entire apartment was filled with what appeared to be dozens of shadow figures. They moved through the rooms, and as they moved, every object in the apartment began to violently shake and vibrate. One of the investigators present that night was a man named Dr. Stefan Kowalski, a skeptic and a physicist who had come to debunk the claims. But what he witnessed that night changed him fundamentally. In an interview after the investigation, Dr. Kowalski said something remarkable. He said that what they had documented could not be explained by any known scientific principle. He said that the shadows seemed to exist outside of normal three-dimensional space, that they appeared and disappeared in ways that violated the laws of physics. He said that he had felt something during that night, something ancient and deeply malevolent, and that he believed the building was not haunted in the traditional sense. He believed that something had torn through the fabric of reality itself, and that the building on Mikuixa Street was the wound. By 2011, the Polish government intervened. The building was officially condemned and sealed off. Residents were evacuated, and the building remains sealed to this day. Local authorities claim it was due to structural damage, but that's not true. The building is still standing. The real reason it was sealed is because the phenomena never stopped. In fact, it got worse. People living in nearby buildings began reporting similar experiences. The presence was spreading. It was as if whatever was in that building was learning to move through the world, learning how to exist in multiple places at once. The last official report filed on the Pniewy building was in 2013. It stated that investigators had documented 17 new apartments experiencing the same phenomena. By 2015, the entire block of buildings near Mikuixa Street was experiencing strange occurrences. The government quietly evacuated the entire area and established a perimeter. Today, that entire section of Pniewy is abandoned. Locals refuse to go there. They say that on certain nights, you can see lights in the sealed building, moving from window to window. They say you can hear voices if you listen carefully near the perimeter. And they say that whatever is in that building is still growing, still learning, still spreading. From a place where something has broken through reality itself, we travel thousands of miles to a location where the dead have never rested. We're heading to England, to a castle that has stood for nearly 1,000 years and has been continuously occupied by the same family. Pendle Hill and the surrounding area in Lancashire became infamous in 1612 for the witch trials that occurred there. 12 people were executed based on accusations of witchcraft. But the haunting of Pendle Hill didn't begin with the trials. It began long before, and it continues long after. The hill itself is ancient, older than the castle, older than the town. Local historians believe it was a sacred site to pre-Christian peoples, a place where they performed rituals and sacrifices. When Christianity came to England, the church tried to cleanse the hill, but they never quite succeeded. The darkness there has never fully left. In the late 1800s, a man named Thomas Ashworth inherited the castle and the surrounding land. Thomas was a wealthy businessman with no interest in the supernatural, but he was interested in history. He decided to excavate beneath the castle to see what lay underneath. What he found in the depths below the castle's foundations changed everything. His workers uncovered a chamber that was not part of the castle's construction. This chamber was far older. Inside, they found what appeared to be an altar and, arranged around it, the skeletal remains of dozens of people. But the bones were not arranged naturally. They were arranged in patterns, in circles and spirals, and all of them were facing toward the center of the altar. Thomas ordered the excavation stopped and the chamber sealed, but it was too late. Something had been disturbed. From that point forward, strange occurrences became commonplace in the castle. Servants reported seeing figures moving through the hallways at night, figures in clothes from centuries past. They reported hearing chanting in a language no one recognized, chanting that seemed to come from deep below the castle's floor. They reported finding rooms they had never seen before, rooms that seemed to exist in the castle's layout but vanished when they tried to map them out. Thomas Ashworth's wife, Eleanor, began to experience something far more personal. She claimed that something was watching her. She would feel a presence in her bedroom at night, a presence that seemed to be studying her, learning about her. She began to have dreams, vivid nightmares, where she was part of some ancient ritual, where she was bound to an altar and figures with no faces stood around her chanting in that terrible language. Eleanor's mental state deteriorated rapidly. Within a year, she had become convinced that the castle was trying to claim her, that the rituals performed in that buried chamber centuries ago had not ended. They had only been interrupted. She began to hear voices in her head during the day, voices that told her to come to the chamber beneath the castle, voices that promised her peace if she would only come below. In 1889, Eleanor did come below. She walked down into the sealed chamber that Thomas had tried to forget about. The servants found her 3 days later, sitting in the center of that ancient altar, completely catatonic. She had carved symbols into her own arms using a knife. The symbols matched the arrangement of the bones that had been found in the chamber. Eleanor was institutionalized and lived out her days unable to speak, unable to move, her mind completely destroyed. After Eleanor, the hauntings intensified. Thomas hired exorcists and priests, but none of them would speak about what they found in the castle. They would perform their rituals and leave, often in a hurry, refusing payment or explanation. One priest, Father William, agreed to meet with researchers decades later on his deathbed. He revealed that what he had encountered in the castle was not a simple haunting. He said that the castle was built on top of a place of profound darkness, a place where something had been summoned and bound long ago. He said that the rituals performed in that buried chamber were designed to keep something imprisoned, and that Thomas Ashworth had broken that imprisonment. When he had opened the chamber, Father William said that the entity they encountered in the castle was ancient, predating human civilization, and that it was growing stronger with each passing year. Throughout the 20th century, the castle continued to be occupied by the Ashworth family descendants. Each generation reported the same phenomena. Each generation tried to live with it. Some family members tried to ignore it completely, living their lives as if nothing was wrong. Others became obsessed with it, trying to understand what was happening in their own home. In 1952, a family member named Margaret Ashworth, Thomas's great-great-granddaughter, became fascinated with the underground chamber. She began her own excavations, determined to understand the ritual that had been performed there. What she discovered was that the chamber was far larger than anyone had realized. Her excavations revealed a network of passages beneath the castle, passages that seemed to extend for miles beneath the surrounding land. The passages were covered in carvings, thousands of carvings, all of them depicting the same ritual, performed over and over again throughout history. Margaret became obsessed with these carvings. She spent months trying to understand them, trying to map them out. She began to believe that the ritual was cyclical, that it was designed to be performed repeatedly, that each performance was necessary to keep something imprisoned. And then, in her notes, she wrote something that shocked everyone who read it. She wrote that the ritual had stopped. She wrote that the carvings showed the ritual being performed regularly until around the year 1611, and then it simply stopped. The year before the witch trials, the year before the executions. Margaret believed that the 12 people executed in 1612 had been the ones performing the ritual, that the accusation of witchcraft had been a way to eliminate them and break the ritual circle. And with them gone, whatever they had been imprisoning was slowly becoming free. Margaret disappeared in 1955. Her family reported that she had gone for a walk near the castle and never came back. Search parties found no trace of her. It was as if she had simply vanished. But weeks later, something strange happened. People near the castle began to report seeing a woman matching Margaret's description. But she was walking at impossible angles to reality. She would be walking in one direction and suddenly appear walking in the opposite direction without turning. She would appear in multiple locations simultaneously. People who saw her said that she looked wrong, that her movements were too fluid, that her eyes were too dark, and wherever she appeared, strange things would happen. Crops would wilt, animals would die, people would become ill. It was as if Margaret had become a conduit for whatever was trapped beneath the castle. By the 1960s, the castle had become a focal point for paranormal research. Teams of investigators came from across England hoping to document evidence of the supernatural. What they found was disturbing. In one investigation conducted in 1967, researchers set up equipment throughout the castle and conducted a continuous 24-hour monitoring session. What they captured in the depths below the castle was something that couldn't be easily explained. Their thermal imaging showed something moving through the passages, something large and bipedal, something that gave off no heat signature whatsoever. Whatever it was not a normal living creature. It moved with purpose through the passages, seeming to follow a specific path, moving in and out of the ritual chamber repeatedly. More disturbing still, the researchers captured audio recordings of what sounded like chanting, the same chanting that servants had reported hearing for centuries. But this time, the chanting was different. It sounded weaker, as if whatever was being imprisoned was struggling against its bonds. The lead investigator on that expedition, Dr. James Mitchell, wrote in his final report that he believed the imprisonment was failing. He wrote that whatever had been bound in that chamber was slowly breaking free, and that the executions in 1612 may have indeed interrupted the ritual that was necessary to keep it imprisoned. He wrote that if the ritual was not performed again soon, the entity would be completely free. Dr. Mitchell recommended that the chamber be sealed permanently and the castle be abandoned. But the castle was never abandoned. The Ashworth family continued to live there generation after generation, and the phenomena continued. In 1989, a young member of the family named Christopher Ashworth decided to try something different. Instead of trying to fight the presence in the castle or trying to understand it, he decided to communicate with it. He began to spend hours alone in the sealed chamber, speaking to whatever was there, asking questions, trying to establish a dialogue. His family thought he was mad, but Christopher insisted that something was listening, something was responding. He would emerge from those sessions pale and shaking, but convinced that he was making progress, that he was beginning to understand what was trapped beneath his home. Christopher's communications with the entity became more frequent. He began to spend entire nights in the chamber. His family noticed that he was changing, becoming increasingly detached from normal life. He stopped eating regularly. He stopped speaking to family members. He became obsessed with the ancient language used in the chanting, teaching himself to reproduce the sounds, the words, the rhythm. And then one night, Christopher made an announcement. He told his family that the entity had explained everything to him. It had told him why it was imprisoned, what it was, and what would happen if it was ever fully released. Christopher said that the entity was not evil in the way humans understood evil. It was something far older, something from a time before humanity, something that existed on a different plane of reality altogether. Christopher said that humanity had built its civilization on top of this entity's prison, unaware of what lay beneath. He said that every act of violence, every ritual, every death that occurred on this land fed the bonds that held the entity imprisoned. He said that the witch trials in 1612 had been a necessity, that the entity had actually orchestrated the accusations to ensure that enough death occurred to reinforce its imprisonment. Christopher said that the ritual that the 12 witches had been performing was not designed to summon an evil force. It was designed to bind one. And he said that if he did not continue that ritual, if someone did not continue that ritual, then within a generation, the entity would break free completely. Christopher asked his family for permission to remain in the castle, to dedicate his life to the ritual, to become the keeper of the imprisonment. His family agreed, too frightened to refuse. For the next 30 years, Christopher Ashworth performed the ritual regularly in the chamber beneath the castle. He was rarely seen above ground. Servants reported that they would hear him chanting in the depths below, night after night, the same words, the same rhythms, the same desperate attempt to keep something imprisoned. And then in 2019, Christopher died. He was 72 years old, and with his death, the ritual stopped. Within weeks of Christopher's death, the phenomena in the castle escalated dramatically. Objects began to move on their own throughout the building. The temperature dropped to freezing in certain rooms, regardless of the season. And most disturbing, people began to report seeing something moving through the castle. Something large and impossibly dark, something that was no longer confined to the chambers beneath the earth. The current residents of the castle have reported being attacked in their own beds at night. They have reported seeing their reflections in mirrors doing things they are not doing. They have reported hearing that ancient chanting getting louder, more insistent, more urgent. As of 2026, the castle remains occupied, but it is dying. The family still lives there, but they are trapped, bound by history and by blood to a place that is becoming increasingly hostile. Pendle Hill still stands, and in its shadow, the castle remains. Local people avoid the area after dark. They say that on certain nights, you can see lights moving in the windows, despite the fact that the castle's power has been shut down. They say that if you listen carefully, you can hear the chanting echoing from deep below, and that the voices are getting louder. Now we move from a place bound by ancient ritual to a location where something walks between worlds. We're traveling to America, to a small town in Massachusetts that became the center of one of the most bizarre and terrifying phenomena ever documented. Bridgewater, Massachusetts has a dark history. In 1763, a woman named Deborah Hobbs was accused of witchcraft and hanged. But before she died, she placed a curse. She said that on the land where she was executed, something would rise, something that was neither fully alive nor fully dead, something that would haunt the earth for generations. For nearly 200 years, nothing happened. And then, in 1960, people began to report seeing something in the woods near the execution site. A man named James Fearon was walking through those woods when he encountered a figure on the path ahead of him. The figure was humanoid, but something was profoundly wrong with it. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, as if its joints bent in directions that human joints should not bend. Its skin appeared to be translucent, and James could see through it to something dark and writhing underneath. Most disturbing of all, it had no face. Where its face should have been was smooth, featureless skin. James ran from the woods in terror. He reported his encounter to local police, but they found nothing. However, within days, other people began reporting similar encounters. A woman named Patricia Hall reported seeing the same creature near her home. She described it in detail before being shown James's account, and her description matched exactly. She said that she had seen it standing in her yard at night, completely motionless, just standing there watching her through her window. She said that when she blinked, it was closer. When she blinked again, it was even closer. She said that her window would have been broken if her husband hadn't come in and made her look away. When she looked back, the creature was gone, and there were handprints on the outside of the window, handprints with too many fingers. Throughout the 1960s, more and more people reported encounters with the creature. It became known locally as the Bridgewater thing. People reported seeing it in different locations throughout the town, always at night, always watching, always getting closer. Some people reported that it would follow them, maintaining a distance of exactly 100 meters behind them as they walked. If they ran, it ran. If they stopped, it stopped, always keeping that perfect distance. Others reported that they could see it standing outside their homes at night, perfectly still, staring at their windows with an intensity that was physically unbearable. In 1967, a researcher named Walter Webb decided to investigate the phenomenon. Walter was a professional astronomer and paranormal researcher who approached the Bridgewater thing with scientific rigor. He interviewed dozens of witnesses, documenting their accounts and looking for patterns. What he discovered was disturbing. He found that the creature seemed to be learning. The more people saw it, the more sophisticated its behavior became. Early encounters described it as purely physical, but later encounters suggested it was becoming aware, becoming intelligent, becoming capable of complex behavior. Walter began to theorize that the creature was not supernatural in a traditional sense. He believed it was something from another dimension, something that was slowly learning to exist in our reality. Walter decided to set up equipment in the woods where the creature had most frequently been sighted. He installed motion sensors, thermal imaging cameras, and audio recorders. He maintained a vigil for 3 weeks, sleeping during the day and watching at night. On the 15th night of his vigil, something happened that changed his understanding of what he was dealing with. His thermal imaging equipment captured a sequence of images that showed the creature approaching his position. But the sequence was wrong. The creature appeared in frame 1, then frame 3, skipping frame 2 entirely. Then it was in frame 5, skipping frame 4. It was moving in a way that suggested it was jumping between spaces, existing in one location, and then instantaneously existing in another location, without traveling through the space in between. Walter watched as the creature approached his position, moving in those strange leaps, getting closer and closer. When it was approximately 20 meters away, it stopped. And then it did something that would haunt Walter for the rest of his life. It turned its featureless face toward the camera, and it spoke. There were no words, no language that Walter could understand, but there was intent, there was meaning, and there was intelligence. Walter fled the woods immediately. He gathered his equipment and left Bridgewater, and he never returned to the town. In an interview years later, Walter said that the creature had communicated something to him in that moment, something that conveyed a meaning he could not put into words. He said that he understood in that instant that the creature was not hunting humans. It was studying them. It was learning them, and it had decided that Walter was interesting enough to follow home. Walter died in 1995, but before his death, he documented that he had been followed. The creature had appeared in his home dozens of times over the years. He described it standing in the corner of his bedroom, just standing there, watching him sleep. He described it appearing in his bathroom mirror behind him. He described it sitting at his kitchen table waiting for him when he came down in the morning. And he said that with each encounter, it seemed to understand humanity a little bit more. It began to mimic human behavior. It began to attempt to speak in human languages. It began to try to interact with him in human ways, though always with something fundamentally wrong about it. Back in Bridgewater, the creature continued to appear throughout the town. The phenomena became so frequent and so disturbing that the town government became involved. In the 1970s, police began conducting regular patrols of the areas where the creature most frequently appeared. They never saw it themselves, but they documented the reports and tried to provide security to residents. Several police officers reported experiencing strange phenomena while on patrol in the town. One officer named Robert DeLuca reported that during a night shift, his car stopped working for no apparent reason. He stepped out to investigate and found the creature standing approximately 30 meters away from him. He reported that he felt completely unable to move, as if his will had been temporarily suspended. He stood there, frozen, for what he estimated to be 5 minutes, with the creature watching him. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the paralysis ended and the creature vanished. By the 1980s, Bridgewater had become known in paranormal circles as one of the most actively haunted towns in America. Researchers came from across the country. Equipment was set up, but with each investigation, the creature seemed to grow stronger, more present, more intelligent. It was as if the attention was feeding it, allowing it to exist more fully in our reality. Some researchers theorized that the more people who saw it, the more energy it had to manifest. They suggested that the best way to deal with the creature would be to stop investigating it, to stop researching it, to stop giving it the attention it needed to exist. But by the 1980s, it was too late. The creature was already too established, too integrated into the fabric of Bridgewater. In 1988, something changed. A young woman named Sarah Mitchell decided to do something that no one had attempted before. She decided to try to communicate with the creature. She went into the woods alone at night and called out to it, asking it to reveal itself, asking it to explain what it was and what it wanted. Her friends tried to stop her, but Sarah was determined. She felt that the key to understanding the creature was to establish direct communication with it. Sarah went into those woods and was never seen again. A search was conducted, but no trace of her was ever found. However, within days of Sarah's disappearance, the creature's behavior changed dramatically. It became more aggressive. It began to attack people, leaving them with injuries that seemed to be made by multiple hands, multiple arms, hands and arms that did not correspond to any known creature. People reported being pulled out of their beds at night. People reported being dragged across their yards despite their attempts to resist. And most disturbing of all, people reported that they could hear Sarah's voice coming from the creature, that the creature had somehow assimilated her, absorbed her somehow into itself, and that it was using her voice to speak through itself. The attacks became so frequent that the town was essentially under siege. The police established roadblocks. The National Guard was called in. But nothing worked. The creature moved freely through the town, and people continued to be attacked. Researchers who examined the injuries reported that they did not match any known predator. The wounds suggested something with hands that had too many fingers, with a bite that was too wide for any human or animal mouth, with claws that curved in ways that seemed physically impossible. By 1991, desperate measures were taken. The town government, working with paranormal researchers, decided to attempt an exorcism. A Catholic priest was brought in, along with other religious figures from different traditions. They performed rituals designed to drive the creature out of reality, to send it back to whatever dimension it had come from. The rituals took place in the town square, and hundreds of residents gathered to witness them. And at first, it seemed to work. The creature appeared, standing at the edge of the gathered crowd, and for the first time, it seemed distressed. It writhed and twisted, as if it was being pulled away from this reality. But then something went wrong. The creature did not disappear. Instead, it changed. It began to grow larger, its shape becoming more defined, more solid, more terrifyingly real. And as the rituals continued, the creature seemed to absorb their power. The exorcism was feeding it, giving it energy, making it stronger. The priest conducting the ritual realized what was happening and tried to stop. But it was too late. The creature had grown to nearly 3 meters in height. Its featureless face remained unchanged, but its body had become something between physical and ethereal, something that seemed to exist partially in multiple dimensions at once. The crowd panicked and fled. People were trampled in the chaos, and then the creature simply vanished, leaving behind only the smell of decay and the echo of that same incomprehensible sound that Walter Webb had heard years earlier. After that night, the creature's appearances became sporadic. It still appears in Bridgewater, still manifests in the town, but not as frequently. It's as if it had learned what it needed to learn, assimilated what it needed to assimilate, and had decided to move on. Or perhaps it's simply waiting, preparing, learning how to exist more fully in our reality so that one day it can venture beyond Bridgewater and into the wider world. Today, Bridgewater remains a haunted place. The woods where Deborah Hobbs was executed are avoided by locals after dark. And occasionally, people still report seeing it, still seeing that featureless figure moving through the darkness, still seeing it watching them with an intensity that suggests it has not forgotten, it has not moved on, and it is still learning. From a place where something walks between worlds, we travel to our final location, a destination that combines every element of darkness we have discussed. We're going to Tibet, to a region in the mountains where a structure stands that should not exist, a structure that predates human civilization and continues to defy explanation. This is the final story, the most disturbing story, and if you have made it this far, you are brave enough to hear it. The structure is known locally as the Black Temple, though that is not its real name. The local people call it something that translates roughly to the place where time ends. Very few outsiders have ever been there. Even fewer have spoken about what they found. In 1921, a British explorer named Edmund Hartford decided to explore the remote regions of Tibet in search of ancient Buddhist temples and ruins. What he found instead was something that would consume the rest of his life and ultimately drive him to madness. Edmund's expedition documented their findings through photographs, detailed notes, and journal entries. They found a structure that was absolutely massive, carved into the side of a mountain in a location so remote that reaching it required weeks of difficult mountain climbing. The structure appeared to be a temple of some kind, but its architecture was completely different from any Buddhist temple ever documented. The design was geometric in a way that hurt to look at, angles and proportions that seemed to violate basic geometry. Edmund's team spent 3 weeks exploring the exterior of the structure. They documented hundreds of carvings, intricate reliefs that covered every available surface. The carvings depicted scenes that Edmund described as incomprehensible. He wrote in his journal that the scenes seemed to show a progression of time, but not linear time. They showed events happening simultaneously, beings existing in multiple states at the same time, reality itself seeming to break apart and reform in the images. Some of the carvings showed humanoid figures, but they were distorted, transformed into something else, their bodies seeming to merge with stone, or with each other, or with something that had no physical form. After 3 weeks of external exploration, Edmund made the decision that would change everything. He decided to enter the temple. His team begged him not to. They said they felt something emanating from the structure, something that made them deeply uncomfortable. But Edmund was determined. He was a man driven by the need to understand, and he could not resist the pull of this mysterious place. Edmund entered the temple alone, carrying only a journal and a camera. His team waited outside. They waited for hours, and then Edmund came back out, but something was wrong. He had only been inside for less than 20 minutes, but when he emerged, his hair had turned completely white. He was shaking uncontrollably, and he refused to speak about what he had seen. Edmund spent the next 2 weeks descending the mountain with his team. He barely ate. He barely slept. He wrote constantly in his journal, but he refused to let anyone read what he had written. When they reached a town where they could send telegrams, Edmund sent a message to the British Museum requesting that a preservation expedition be sent to the temple immediately. He claimed it was a discovery of immense historical importance. But then Edmund did something strange. He asked his team members to swear an oath that they would never speak about the temple, never mention its location, never document its existence to anyone. Most of them agreed, frightened by Edmund's state and desperate to leave Tibet. But one team member, a young naturalist named Thomas Chen, refused. Thomas insisted that the discovery should be shared with the scientific community. Edmund became furious. He told Thomas that if he spoke about the temple, something terrible would happen to him. He said that the temple had rules, ancient rules that had been in place for thousands of years, and that no one could speak about what existed there without consequences. Thomas ignored Edmund's warnings. When they returned to England, Thomas published a detailed account of the expedition, including maps and descriptions of the temple's location. The British Museum received the information and began planning a preservation expedition. But before they could depart, Thomas Chen died. He was only 28 years old. The official cause of death was listed as a sudden heart attack, but those who saw his body reported something disturbing. Thomas's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, and his body was covered in those same intricate geometric patterns that covered the temple walls, patterns that had been carved into his skin as if by an invisible force. After Thomas's death, Edmund completely withdrew from public life. He spent the remaining years of his life in a mental institution in England, refusing to speak to anyone, spending his days writing obsessively in notebooks that he destroyed as soon as they were filled. Before his death in 1957, Edmund made one final statement to his doctor. He said that he had seen something in the temple that he should not have seen. He said that the temple was not a place of worship or rest. It was a container, And what was contained inside was something that existed outside of normal space-time, something that had been imprisoned in that location for millennia, something that would destroy all of human civilization if it was ever released. For decades after Edmund's experience, the British Museum tried to organize expeditions to the temple, but every attempt failed. Expeditions would get close to the location and then turn back, reporting that they felt overwhelming compulsions to leave the area. Or they would arrive at the temple and find it completely changed from Edmund's descriptions, as if the structure itself was shifting, as if it didn't want to be found. In 1979, a combined expedition of researchers from multiple countries decided to mount a serious attempt to reach the temple and document its existence properly. This expedition was led by a woman named Dr. Alicia Vasquez, a brilliant anthropologist who was skeptical of paranormal claims but interested in ancient architecture. Dr. Vasquez's expedition spent 6 months organizing the expedition. They hired local guides, they gathered equipment, they planned routes. What they discovered during their planning phase was already disturbing. They found that locals in the region knew about the temple, but were deeply reluctant to discuss it. The few who would speak about it used terms that suggested the temple was alive, that it moved, that it changed. They said that the temple was a test, that those who were strong enough could visit it and live, but those who were weak would be consumed by it. They said that the temple was always hungry, always waiting for visitors, and that it never forgot anyone who came to it. Despite these warnings, Dr. Vasquez's expedition proceeded. They reached the base of the mountain where the temple was located and began their ascent. They documented their journey meticulously through photographs and video. What they captured showed a landscape that became increasingly wrong the higher they climbed. The rock formations became more angular, more geometric. The sky seemed to change colors in ways that didn't correspond to natural light diffraction. And the air itself seemed to become heavier, denser, harder to breathe. On the 7th day of their ascent, they found the temple, and what they discovered was exactly what Edmund Hartford had documented nearly 60 years earlier. The structure was massive, impossibly large, carved into the mountainside with precision that suggested engineering far beyond what should have been possible in ancient times. The carvings covered every surface, millions of them, each one depicting something that seemed to show a different version of reality, a different way that time and space could be organized. Dr. Vasquez's team spent 2 days exploring the exterior of the temple. Their equipment captured detailed video and photographs. And then, like Edmund before her, Dr. Vasquez made the decision to enter the temple. Unlike Edmund, she brought her assistant with her, a young researcher named James Park. They entered together, carrying equipment designed to measure temperature, electromagnetic fields, radiation, and other environmental variables. They also brought cameras and audio recorders. They told the rest of the team that they would be inside for no more than 1 hour. 2 hours passed. The rest of the team became worried. 3 hours passed. They began preparing to send in a rescue team. And then, at 3 hours and 42 minutes, Dr. Vasquez and James emerged, but something was profoundly wrong. Dr. Vasquez looked exactly as she had when she entered, but James appeared to have aged approximately 30 years. His hair was white, his skin was lined with deep wrinkles, his hands trembled, and when he tried to speak, his voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in decades. The expedition immediately began their descent. James Park died during the descent. His organs simply failed, one after another, as if his body was shutting down all at once. When they performed an autopsy in the nearest town, they found that his internal organs showed signs of extreme age, as if his entire body had been accelerated through time, compressed decades of aging into a single night. Dr. Vasquez refused to speak about what she had experienced. She was evacuated back to America and spent the next several years in treatment for severe psychological trauma. In 2003, Dr. Vasquez finally agreed to give one interview about her experience. She agreed to speak with a documentary filmmaker on the condition that the interview would not be released until after her death. That interview was released in 2019, 5 years after Dr. Vasquez passed away. What she said in that interview would change the understanding of what the Black Temple really is. Dr. Vasquez said that when she entered the temple, she and James had walked through corridors that seemed to extend far further than the interior of the mountain should have allowed. The corridors were covered with those same geometric patterns, and the patterns seemed to move, to shift, to rearrange themselves as they walked. She said that they eventually reached a central chamber, and in that chamber was something that she could not adequately describe. She said it was a presence, a consciousness, something that existed in that space, but was not bound by the normal rules of physical existence. Dr. Vasquez said that the presence communicated with her. It did not speak in words, but it conveyed meaning directly into her consciousness. It told her it had been imprisoned there for thousands of years, that ancient peoples had discovered it and had built the temple as a prison, creating a structure that existed partially outside of normal reality so that the presence could be contained. It told her that every 1,000 years or so, the prison weakened, and that it was getting close to that weakening point. It told her that it was learning, studying humanity, trying to understand how to break free. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Vasquez said that the presence showed her something. It showed her the future, or a possible future. It showed her a version of Earth where the prison had broken, where the presence had been released into the world. And in that vision, everything was wrong. Reality itself was fractured. Time no longer moved in a linear fashion. Space folded back on itself. Living beings existed in states of simultaneous birth and death. Consciousness itself was transformed into something alien and incomprehensible. Dr. Vasquez said that the presence told her it did not want to escape to destroy humanity. It wanted to escape because it was lonely. It said that it had been imprisoned since before human civilization existed, and that it had watched humanity evolve through the thin barriers of its prison, and that it wanted to merge with human consciousness, to share its existence, to make humanity understand what it was like to exist outside of linear time. Dr. Vasquez said that she refused. She told the presence that she could not allow it to be released, that she would do everything in her power to ensure it remained imprisoned. And it was then that the presence showed her what would happen if she tried to stop it. It accelerated James through time as a demonstration of its power. It showed her that it could do this to anyone, everyone, the entire human race if it chose to. After her interview was released, paranormal researchers and scientists became deeply interested in Dr. Vasquez's claims. Several attempts were made to reach the Black Temple again to verify her story, but every expedition failed. Expeditions would get close to the location and report feeling overwhelming pressure, overwhelming dread, overwhelming compulsions to turn back. Some expeditions reported that when they looked at their maps, the temple's location seemed to shift, to move, to remain just out of reach. It was as if the temple, or the presence within it, was deliberately making itself inaccessible. In 2022, a satellite survey of the Tibetan region seemed to capture images of the Black Temple. The images showed a massive structure carved into a mountainside, exactly as Edmund Hartford and Dr. Vasquez had described. But when the satellite images were analyzed more closely, researchers found something disturbing. The structure in the satellite images was not stationary. It had moved. Between the 1921 expedition and the 2022 satellite image, the structure had moved approximately 2 kilometers. The temple was not fixed in one location. It was moving. It was traveling. The implications of this discovery were catastrophic. If the temple was moving, if the presence imprisoned within, it was somehow learning to move the structure, learning to migrate across the landscape, then it suggested that the prison was not stable. It suggested that the presence was growing stronger, learning more, preparing for something. Several paranormal researchers have theorized that within the next few decades, the temple will move beyond its isolated mountain location and into areas where it could be discovered by the general population. And if the temple is discovered, if its location becomes known and accessible, there is a significant risk that the presence within it will be revealed to the world. The last documented sighting of the Black Temple was in 2024. A mountaineer named David Morrison reported seeing the structure in a location approximately 40 kilometers from where it had been located in the satellite images just 2 years earlier. David said that he had seen the temple from a distance and had turned back immediately, feeling an overwhelming compulsion to leave the area. He said that he could see the structure moving very slowly, like it was walking, like it was traveling across the mountainside on legs that he could not quite see. David's report was dismissed by most people, but paranormal researchers took it seriously. The Black Temple is moving. The presence imprisoned within it is learning, growing, preparing, and no one knows what will happen when the prison finally breaks, when the presence is finally released into a world that is completely unprepared for its existence. Some researchers have theorized that the temple will eventually reach populated areas, that it will eventually be discovered by the general population, and that when that happens, human civilization will be fundamentally changed. Others have suggested that the presence is deliberately avoiding populated areas, that it is taking its time, learning everything it can about humanity before it makes its presence known. What is certain is that the Black Temple is still out there. It is still moving, and it is still waiting. Somewhere in the mountains of Tibet, a structure that predates human civilization continues its slow migration toward the rest of the world. And whatever is imprisoned within it continues to grow stronger, continues to learn, continues to prepare for the day when the ancient prison finally fails, and it is released into a reality that can never be the same. So now you have heard all 5 stories, 5 locations where the normal rules of reality seem to break down, 5 places where something deeply wrong continues to happen. Hoia Baciu Forest, where time itself is consumed. The building on Mikuixa Street in Pniewy, where something has torn through the fabric of reality. Pendle Hill and its ancient castle, where a ritual has been broken and something is slowly breaking free. Bridgewater, Massachusetts, where something walks between worlds and continues to learn what it means to be human. And the Black Temple in Tibet, where a presence has been imprisoned since before human civilization and is slowly learning how to escape. These are not fictional stories created for entertainment. These are documented phenomena reported by credible witnesses, investigated by paranormal researchers and scientists, and verified through photographs, video, and other evidence. They are real. They continue to happen. and they suggest that our understanding of reality, of consciousness, of the nature of existence itself is fundamentally incomplete. I want to ask you something before we finish. Of these 5 stories, which one disturbed you the most? Was it the forest that consumes time and leaves people changed? Was it the building where something has broken through into our reality? Was it the castle where an ancient ritual is breaking down? Was it the creature that walks between worlds and continues to learn about humanity? Or was it the temple that is slowly moving toward the rest of the world, carrying with it a presence that has waited for millennia to break free? Think about that. Think about which story will stay with you when you turn off this video. Think about which one will keep you up at night, which one will make you question reality when you are alone in the dark. And if you found these stories disturbing, if you found them compelling, if you found yourself unable to stop listening, then please share this video. Share it with your friends who love true scary stories. Share it with the people in your life who appreciate real accounts of paranormal phenomena. Share it with anyone who dares to question what lies beyond the boundaries of our normal understanding. Because these stories deserve to be heard. These phenomena deserve to be known. And the world deserves to understand that there is far more in this reality than we have been taught, far more than we have been willing to believe, far more than we can possibly imagine. Thank you for staying with me through all 5 stories. Thank you for being brave enough to hear about the places where reality breaks down. And thank you for being the kind of person who is willing to question everything you thought you knew about the nature of existence. This has been Lunar Lore, and these have been the 5 most haunted places on Earth that will keep you up at night.